In the shadow of a crimson sun, where the sky shimmered like molten glass and the air carried the faint hum of an alien world, there stood a palace that defied imagination. Its spires reached toward the heavens, twisting into impossible shapes as though they had been sculpted by the dreams of gods. The structure gleamed with an iridescent sheen, its surface shifting colors under the light of twin moons, one silver, one obsidian, that hung low in the perpetual twilight. This was no ordinary palace. It belonged to the cruel alien queen, ruler of the Valeth Dominion, a species whose name struck fear across galaxies. The queen herself was a figure of both terror and awe. Her form was tall and sinuous, her skin glinting like polished obsidian, interwoven with veins of glowing blue energy that pulsed faintly beneath her flesh. Her eyes were vast pools of liquid starlight, capable of piercing through the soul of any who dared meet her gaze. She wore armor forged from the bones of fallen enemies, each piece intricately carved with runes that whispered curses to those who came too close. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the weight of storms and the chill of deep space, a sound that could command armies or shatter resolve with equal ease. Her court was a spectacle unlike anything seen before. Within the great hall of her palace, towering columns spiraled upward, adorned with luminescent crystals that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Strange flora grew in defiance of gravity, floating midair as if suspended by invisible threads. The air was thick with the scent of exotic spices and something metallic, almost electric, that made every breath feel charged with anticipation. Around her throne gathered beings from countless worlds, some humanoid, others grotesque amalgamations of limbs and eyes, all vying for favor in her cold, calculating presence. It was said that the queen ruled not just through power but through cruelty refined into an art form. Those who displeased her often vanished without a trace, their fates left to rumor and dread. Yet, despite her reputation, whispers of rebellion simmered beneath the surface of her dominion. For all her might, even the queen could not extinguish hope entirely, not while there remained warriors willing to stand against her tyranny. Among these rebels was Kale, a human warrior whose legend had spread far beyond his homeworld. He was not born into battle but forged by it. His journey began on Earth, where he had once been an ordinary man living an ordinary life until the day the Valeth ships descended upon his city. In the chaos that followed, he lost everything, his family, his home, his sense of purpose, but what emerged from the ashes was a man driven by vengeance and a burning desire to reclaim humanity's dignity. Over years of relentless struggle, he became more than a soldier. He became a symbol. Kale's physique bore testament to his trials. Lean yet muscular, his body was a map of scars earned in skirmishes fought across barren wastelands and crumbling ruins. His face, framed by unruly dark hair streaked with gray, carried lines etched by hardship and determination. But it was his eyes that drew people in, piercing green orbs that seemed to hold galaxies within them, reflecting both sorrow and unyielding resolve. Clad in battered armor pieced together from salvaged materials, he moved with the grace of a predator, every step deliberate, every action calculated. His arrival at the palace was unexpected, a bold intrusion that sent shockwaves through the queen's court. No one knew how he had breached the impenetrable defenses surrounding the fortress, nor did they understand why he sought audience with the very being responsible for so much suffering. Some speculated he intended to plead for mercy, though few believed such a gesture would sway the queen. Others thought him mad, walking willingly into the lion's den. Whatever the truth, Kale's presence alone commanded attention, his aura of quiet defiance cutting through the oppressive grandeur of the hall like a blade. When he finally stood before the queen, the tension in the room was palpable. The assembled courtiers fell silent, their gazes flickering between the warrior and their sovereign. The queen regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and disdain, her luminous eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to discern some hidden weakness. Kale met her stare unflinchingly, his posture unwavering despite the overwhelming odds stacked against him. It was clear this meeting would alter the course of many lives, but whether it would lead to triumph or tragedy remained uncertain. The silence stretched taut, broken only by the faint hum of energy coursing through the palace's crystalline structures. Finally, the queen spoke, her voice resonating like thunder wrapped in silk. "You dare to enter my domain, human," she began, her tone laced with mockery and barely concealed contempt. "Do you truly believe your fragile existence holds any value here? Speak quickly, or I may find other uses for your insolence." Kale straightened, his jaw tightening as he summoned every ounce of courage within him. "I am no mere intruder," he replied, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "I come not to beg for mercy, nor to grovel at your feet. I have come to challenge you, to demand justice for those whose lives you've stolen, whose worlds you've burned to ash." A ripple of murmurs swept through the court, the assembled beings exchanging uneasy glances. Such audacity was unheard of, especially from a human. The queen tilted her head, her expression unreadable, though the faintest flicker of amusement danced in her starlit eyes. "Justice," she echoed, her laughter sharp and biting, like shards of ice slicing through the air. "How quaint. Do you think your feeble notions of morality mean anything to me? To us?" She gestured expansively to the court around her, her movements fluid yet commanding. "Your kind clings to ideals that are meaningless in the face of survival. Strength is the only law worth following. And you, little human, are nothing but a relic of weakness." Kale clenched his fists, the muscles in his arms coiled tight like springs ready to snap. "Weakness," he shot back, his voice rising, fueled by anger and desperation. "Is that what you call standing up for what's right? Is that what you call fighting for those who can't fight for themselves?" He took a step forward, heedless of the guards who tensed at his movement. "You rule through fear and pain, but you'll never understand the strength it takes to rise after being broken, to keep going when all seems lost. That's the kind of strength you'll never possess." For a moment, the queen's mask of indifference slipped, revealing a flicker of irritation. She rose from her throne, her towering form casting a shadow that swallowed Kale whole. "Enough," she hissed, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You presume to lecture me on strength? You, who stand alone, powerless, in the heart of my empire? Your words are empty, your defiance pathetic. Leave now, while I still allow it, or remain and face the consequences of your arrogance." The atmosphere crackled with tension, the air heavy with the promise of violence. Kale hesitated, his chest heaving as he wrestled with the urge to lash out, to strike at the source of so much suffering. But he knew better. Charging blindly into battle here would be suicide, and dying now would serve no purpose. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his gaze, though not in submission. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low but resolute. "Mark my words. You haven't seen the last of me." The queen sneered, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Oh, I doubt that very much." With a wave of her hand, the guards closed in, their weapons trained on Kale as they escorted him from the chamber. As the massive doors slammed shut behind him, sealing him out of the palace, Kale felt the weight of failure pressing down on him. But beneath the bitterness and shame, something else stirred, a spark of resolve, stubborn and unyielding. If she thought this was the end, she was gravely mistaken. Banished from the palace, Kale found himself adrift in the alien city that sprawled beneath its shadow. The streets were alive with a cacophony of sounds, hisses, clicks, and guttural growls mingling with the mechanical whir of hovercrafts and the distant hum of energy conduits. Towering structures loomed overhead, their surfaces crawling with bioluminescent patterns that shifted like living things. The air smelled of ozone and something faintly metallic, a reminder that this was not his world. Every step he took felt heavier than the last, the weight of rejection settling deep into his bones. He wandered aimlessly at first, his mind replaying the confrontation with the queen over and over. Her words echoed in his thoughts, each syllable a dagger twisting deeper into his pride. Powerless. The word stung more than any physical blow ever could. Was she right? Had he been foolish to think he could face her alone, armed with nothing but conviction and a battered sword? The doubts gnawed at him, threatening to consume what little hope he had left. But then, amidst the despair, a flicker of clarity emerged. He realized he couldn't do this alone. Not anymore. If he wanted to stand a chance against the queen, he needed allies. And so, he began to observe the city around him, searching for signs of resistance. It didn't take long to notice the subtle undercurrents of dissent. In dimly lit alleys, whispered conversations carried undertones of rebellion. In marketplaces, coded gestures passed between vendors and customers. Even among the enslaved laborers hauling crates of supplies, there were moments of quiet solidarity, fleeting but unmistakable. Kale approached cautiously, knowing trust would not come easily. At first, he was met with suspicion, even hostility. Many saw him as just another reckless human, doomed to fail like so many before him. But Kale persisted, sharing fragments of his story and listening intently to theirs. He learned of families torn apart, homes destroyed, entire cultures erased under the Queen's iron rule. He heard tales of secret meetings held in abandoned warehouses, of networks smuggling food and medicine to those in need, of plans to sabotage key installations. Slowly, grudgingly, some began to see him not as a lone wolf but as a potential leader. One evening, he found himself in a decrepit building on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by a motley group of rebels. There was Mira, a wiry engineer whose hands moved with precision as she tinkered with stolen tech. Jorik, a hulking ex-gladiator whose scars told stories of battles won and lost. And Lyra, a soft-spoken medic whose calm demeanor masked a fierce determination. They argued heatedly about strategy, their voices overlapping in frustration and urgency. Kale listened silently, absorbing their concerns, their fears, their hopes. When the discussion lulled, he stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "We're stronger together," he said simply. "I don't pretend to know everything, but I know we can't win if we keep fighting separately. We need a plan, one that hits her where it hurts most." His words hung in the air, met initially with skepticism. But as he outlined his vision, a coordinated assault targeting the Queen's supply lines, communication hubs, and propaganda machines, the room began to buzz with cautious optimism. Over the following weeks, Kale threw himself into the work of organizing the resistance. Days blurred into nights as he helped map out routes, devise codes, and train recruits. He sparred with Jorik in makeshift arenas, honing his combat skills while teaching others how to wield weapons effectively. He worked alongside Mira, learning the intricacies of alien technology and brainstorming ways to turn it against their oppressors. And when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, Lyra was there, offering quiet encouragement and reminding him why they fought. Yet, even as the rebellion gained momentum, Kale couldn't shake the memory of the Queen's disdainful gaze. Each victory, no matter how small, felt bittersweet, tinged with the knowledge that the greatest battle still lay ahead. Doubts lingered, whispering insidious questions. Would they be ready when the time came? Could they truly overthrow someone so powerful, so ruthless? These thoughts haunted him in the quiet moments, when the adrenaline faded and the enormity of their task settled heavily on his shoulders. Still he pressed on, driven by a singular purpose. The Queen had dismissed him, cast him out as insignificant. But she had underestimated him, and that mistake would cost her dearly. Kale vowed to make sure of it. As the rebellion grew stronger, whispers of Kale's defiance began to spread far beyond the confines of the alien city. Tales of the human warrior who dared to stand against the cruel alien queen traveled like wildfire, carried by traders, smugglers, and refugees fleeing the Valeth dominion. Across distant planets and forgotten colonies, people listened with a mixture of disbelief and awe. Some dismissed the stories as exaggeration, the stuff of legend rather than reality. But others clung to them, drawing inspiration from the idea that even one man could challenge the seemingly invincible. The impact rippled outward, igniting sparks of hope in places where despair had long taken root. On a mining colony ravaged by forced labor, workers began sabotaging equipment, their acts of defiance timed to coincide with rumors of Kale's victories. In a refugee camp on the edge of contested space, children played games reenacting his supposed exploits, their laughter carrying a note of defiance that hadn't been heard in years. Even among the Queen's own subjects, cracks began to form. Low-ranking soldiers muttered uneasily about the growing unrest, questioning whether their loyalty to the throne was worth the cost. Dissent brewed quietly, bubbling beneath the surface of the empire. Back in the alien city, Kale noticed the change in the air. The streets, once suffocating under the weight of oppression, now buzzed with a newfound energy. Graffiti appeared overnight on the walls of buildings, crude depictions of the Queen crossed out and replaced with symbols of resistance. Whispers of Kale's name carried reverence, spoken in tones reserved for heroes of old. Strangers approached him in markets and alleyways, slipping him scraps of information or offering aid however they could. It was as if his defiance had awakened something dormant within the oppressed, a collective realization that they were not powerless after all. But with this swelling tide of support came danger. The Queen's forces tightened their grip, deploying patrols more frequently and cracking down on suspected dissidents with brutal efficiency. Informants lurked in every corner, their eyes scanning for signs of rebellion. Executions became public spectacles, designed to instill fear and crush any lingering thoughts of uprising. Yet, paradoxically, the harsher the crackdown, the fiercer the resistance grew. People risked everything, freedom, safety, life itself, to join the cause, emboldened by the belief that change was possible. Kale bore witness to the sacrifices firsthand. One night, during a raid on a munitions depot, he watched as a young rebel named Taryn shielded him from a blast meant to kill them both. Her final words, gasped through bloodied lips, were simple yet profound. "Finish it." Another time, an elderly merchant who had supplied the rebellion with vital resources was dragged away by enforcers, his cries echoing through the streets as he refused to betray his comrades. Each loss weighed heavily on Kale, chipping away at his resolve even as it hardened his determination. The emotional toll was immense. Nights were the hardest, when the silence allowed memories to creep in unchecked. Faces of the fallen haunted his dreams, their voices blending into a chorus of accusation and encouragement. Was he leading them to victory, or to slaughter? Could he bear the responsibility of so many lives resting on his shoulders? These questions tormented him, leaving him restless and hollow-eyed. Yet, when dawn broke, he pushed aside his doubts and stepped back into the fray, knowing there was no turning back now. Amidst the chaos, Kale found solace in unexpected places. Myra's dry humor lightened the mood during tense planning sessions, her quick wit cutting through the gloom like a knife. Jorek's unwavering loyalty grounded him, the big man's steadfast presence a reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight. And Lyra became his anchor. Her gentle hands tended not only to wounds but also to the fractures in his spirit, her quiet strength steadying him when the burden threatened to break him. Together, they formed a bond forged in fire, united by a shared purpose and an unspoken promise to see this through to the end. Still, the specter of the Queen loomed large over everything. Reports trickled in of increased activity within the palace, reinforcements arriving, defenses being fortified, whispers of a weapon capable of annihilating entire populations. Kale knew the clock was ticking, that the window of opportunity was closing fast. The rebellion needed a decisive move, something bold enough to shake the foundations of the Queen's power. But what? How could they possibly breach the impenetrable fortress that had already expelled him once? These thoughts consumed him as he stood atop a crumbling rooftop overlooking the city, the palace gleaming ominously in the distance. The wind whipped around him, carrying the faint scent of smoke and desperation. Below, the streets teemed with life, a chaotic tapestry of resilience and fear. Somewhere out there, the seeds of revolution continued to grow, nurtured by the sacrifices of those who believed in him. Kale clenched his fists, his knuckles white against the fading light. Whatever happened next, whatever price he had to pay, he would not falter. The Queen had underestimated him once. She wouldn't get the chance to do it again. Word of the rebellion's growing strength reached the ears of the cruel alien Queen, carried by trembling messengers who dared not omit a single detail. Her reaction was swift and merciless. The palace erupted into a flurry of activity as orders cascaded down the chain of command, each directive sharper than the last. Envoys were dispatched to quell unrest in neighboring territories, their instructions clear: crush dissent without mercy. Patrols doubled in size, their routes unpredictable and their methods brutal. Public executions became daily spectacles, designed to instill terror and snuff out any flicker of hope. Yet, despite the escalation, the Queen remained eerily composed, her demeanor betraying none of the anxiety that gripped her advisors. Behind closed doors, however, her composure cracked. In the privacy of her chambers, she paced like a caged predator, her glowing veins pulsing with agitation. The human warrior's name hung in the air like a curse, spoken only in hushed tones by her closest confidants. How could one insignificant creature inspire such widespread defiance? The question gnawed at her, festering like an open wound. She had banished him, humiliated him, stripped him of any semblance of power, and yet he persisted. Worse still, he thrived, rallying others to his cause and turning her own subjects against her. It was inconceivable, infuriating, and deeply unsettling. Her fury manifested in ways both overt and subtle. Servants bore the brunt of her wrath, punished for the slightest misstep or perceived disloyalty. Courtiers tiptoed around her, their usual sycophantic smiles replaced by expressions of thinly veiled dread. Even her elite guard, normally immune to her temper, flinched under her icy glare. Yet, for all her rage, there was something else lurking beneath the surface, an emotion she rarely allowed herself to feel. Fear. Not fear of Kale himself, but fear of what he represented. His defiance was a mirror reflecting the fragility of her reign, exposing cracks she had long ignored. If a lone human could inspire rebellion, what did that say about the foundation of her empire? Determined to regain control, the queen devised a plan both cunning and ruthless. She ordered the construction of a new weapon, one capable of obliterating entire cities with a single strike. Its development was shrouded in secrecy, known only to her inner circle and a select group of engineers. Meanwhile, she deployed spies to infiltrate the rebellion, feeding her false information designed to lure Kale into a trap. Every move was calculated, every decision aimed at dismantling the threat before it could escalate further. Yet, despite her efforts, a nagging doubt lingered in the recesses of her mind. What if Kale saw through her schemes? What if he turned her own strategies against her? The answer came sooner than she expected. One evening, as the twin moons bathed the palace in their eerie glow, a courier burst into the throne room, breathless and pale. The message he delivered was brief but devastating. The rebellion had struck at the heart of her operations, destroying a critical supply depot and freeing hundreds of prisoners destined for the mines. The attack bore Kale's signature, precise, daring, and unrelenting. The queen's reaction was immediate and volcanic. She stormed from the throne room, her voice reverberating through the halls as she issued commands that sent tremors through the palace. Reinforcements were mobilized, intelligence networks redoubled, and every available resource poured into hunting down the rebels. Yet, even as she raged, a strange admiration flickered in her starlit eyes. She hated Kale, despised everything he stood for, but she could not deny the brilliance of his tactics. He was unpredictable, resourceful, and utterly relentless. Each victory he claimed chipped away at her authority, forcing her to adapt in ways she had never anticipated. And though she would never admit it aloud, part of her respected the sheer audacity of his defiance. After all, strength was the only law she recognized, and Kale, for all his flaws, was proving to be stronger than she had ever imagined. As the days stretched into weeks, the tension between the queen and Kale reached a fever pitch. Both sides prepared for what they knew would be the inevitable clash, a confrontation that would determine the fate of the rebellion and the future of the Valeth dominion. The stage was set, the players poised, and the stakes higher than ever before. Only time would tell who would emerge victorious, and who would be left in ruins. In the depths of the alien city, beneath the shadow of the palace that loomed like a monolith of oppression, Kale stood at the center of a hastily assembled council of rebels. The room was dimly lit, its flickering lights casting jagged shadows on the cracked walls. Maps and schematics were spread across a rickety table, their edges weighted down by scavenged tools and scraps of metal. The air was thick with urgency, the kind that prickled at the back of necks and tightened throats. This was it, the moment they had been working toward, the culmination of months of sacrifice, planning, and whispered dreams of freedom. Kale's voice cut through the tension, steady but edged with the weight of what lay ahead. "We strike tonight," he said, his green eyes locking onto each face in turn. "The queen thinks she's untouchable, that her fortress is impenetrable. We'll show her otherwise." His words hung in the air, met with a mixture of grim determination and quiet apprehension. He didn't sugarcoat the risks. They all knew the odds were stacked against them. Failure meant death, or worse. But success. Success meant more than just toppling a tyrant. It meant hope. It meant a chance to rebuild, to heal, to live without fear. The plan was audacious, bordering on reckless. Under cover of darkness, 3 teams would converge on the palace from different directions, each tasked with disabling key systems. Communications, defense grids, and the newly constructed weapon rumored to be capable of leveling entire cities. Timing was everything. A single misstep could doom the entire operation. Kale would lead the central assault, aiming to breach the throne room itself, a suicide mission by any measure. Yet, when he volunteered, no one argued. They trusted him, not because he was infallible, but because he had proven time and again that he would give everything for their cause. As the hours ticked away, the rebels prepared in silence. Weapons were checked and rechecked, ammunition counted twice over. Mira worked tirelessly, fine-tuning a device designed to short-circuit the palace's energy shields, a prototype she swore would work, though her furrowed brow suggested doubt even she wouldn't admit aloud. Jorek sharpened blades with methodical precision, his massive frame casting a long shadow as he moved between tasks. Lyra tended to the injured, her hands steady as she applied salves and bandages, her touch a rare comfort in the chaos. Kale retreated to a quiet corner, his mind racing despite his outward calm. Memories flooded in, faces of those who had fallen, voices urging him onward, the sting of the Queen's dismissal still fresh in his mind. He clenched his fists, grounding himself in the present. This wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. It was about something bigger than himself, bigger than any one person. It was about proving that even in the darkest of times, light could still break through. Night fell, cloaking the city in shadows. The rebels moved like ghosts, slipping through alleys and abandoned buildings, their footsteps muffled by the hum of distant machinery. Communication was minimal, limited to terse whispers and hand signals. Above them, the twin moons cast an eerie glow, illuminating the palace's spires like jagged teeth waiting to devour them. Kale led his team to their designated position, his heart pounding in rhythm with the pulse of the city around him. The others followed without hesitation, their trust in him absolute. At the appointed hour, the attack began. Explosions rocked the night, sending plumes of smoke billowing into the sky. Alarms blared, their shrill cries piercing the silence. Chaos erupted as the palace's defenses scrambled to respond, their usual precision thrown into disarray by the coordinated strikes. Myra's device worked, just barely, creating a narrow window for the teams to advance. Jorek's brute strength tore through barricades, clearing paths for the others. Lyra stayed close to Kale, her medical kit slung over one shoulder, her eyes scanning for threats. The closer they got to the throne room, the fiercer the resistance became. Guards poured into the corridors, their weapons firing bursts of searing energy. Kale moved with lethal efficiency, his sword flashing in the dim light as he cut down foes with practiced precision. Behind him, his team fought with equal ferocity, their unity making them stronger than the sum of their parts. Still, casualties mounted. Each loss hit hard, a reminder of the cost of defiance. Finally, they reached the massive doors of the throne room. Kale paused, his chest heaving as he stared at the ornate carvings that adorned the entrance. Beyond those doors lay the woman who had dismissed him, who had called him powerless. Beyond those doors lay the culmination of everything he had fought for. He turned to his team, his expression unreadable but his resolve unshakable. "This is it," he said, his voice low but carrying the weight of destiny. "Whatever happens next, remember why we're here." With that, he raised his weapon and charged forward, the doors bursting open with a deafening crash. Inside, the Queen awaited, her luminous eyes blazing with fury and something else, something that might have been respect. The throne room was bathed in an otherworldly glow, the Queen standing at its center like a figure carved from wrath and starlight. Her voice cut through the chaos, sharp and mocking. "You've come far, human," she sneered, her gaze piercing. "But this is where your rebellion ends." Kale stepped forward, his blade steady despite the storm raging inside him. "No," he said, his voice resonating with quiet fury. "This is where it begins." The battle that followed was fierce and unrelenting. Energy crackled, steel clashed, and the air grew thick with smoke and desperation. Kale fought with everything he had, his movements fueled by purpose, his heart pounding with defiance. For a moment, it seemed impossible, her power overwhelming, her cruelty unmatched. But then, something shifted. The Queen faltered, her confidence cracking under the weight of Kale's relentless determination. "You underestimated me," Kale growled, pressing his advantage. "And you underestimated them." With a final, desperate strike, he shattered her defenses, leaving her vulnerable. The room fell silent, save for the hum of energy dissipating into the air. The Queen stared at him, her expression unreadable, as if grappling with a truth she could no longer deny. Outside, the sounds of victory echoed, the rebels had won. The palace trembled, its foundations shaken not just by force, but by the sheer will of those who refused to be broken. Kale lowered his weapon, breathing heavily. "It's over," he said, his voice carrying both triumph and sorrow. "Your reign ends here." The queen's form wavered, her glowing veins dimming like dying stars. For the first time, she looked not like a ruler, but like a being undone by her own hubris. And as she collapsed to her knees, the throne room seemed to exhale, a collective release of centuries of fear.